All right, so last time we talked about Woodrow Wilson's domestic policies. For the most part, in Wilson's first administration, he's going to do everything he wants to do. He started regulating the economy more. We talked about the Federal Trade Commission. We talked about the Federal Reserve. Wilson is following out the Democrats' plan to help the little guy, regulate the economy, uh, things like that, use economic reform to better people's lives. Stay away from social issues. Again, Democrats based in the South want to shy away from social issues, but they're now on board with these progressive reforms as it comes to the economy, and Wilson had done that in his first administration. Wilson is going to run in 1916. He's going to win re-election, and he wants to make his second administration about the same thing as the first, handling the economy, carrying out this Democrats' new platform of using the economy to help the little guy. Unfortunately for Wilson, something's going to happen, and this begins right in the middle of his first administration, and this is going to assume all of his attention. What happens is, in 1914, war will break out in Europe. This war is going to grow in scale. It's going to eventually consume the entire world. It's going to come to be known as World War I eventually, although it's known as the Great War at the time. And eventually the United States will be forced to join during this war. And then Wilson, who wanted to handle domestic issues and wasn't interested in international issues, is now going to have to decide foreign policy for the United States. This is not something Wilson is prepared to do. As a matter of fact, when he entered the presidency, one of the reasons he appoints William Jennings Bryan as his Secretary of State is because William Jennings Bryan is generally an anti-imperialist. He doesn't like the United States getting involved in foreign affairs. And so Wilson has that same thought process when he enters the presidency. Let's just focus on domestic things. Let's ignore what's happening internationally. But as we all know, as a lot of presidents have discovered, sometimes what you set out to do isn't what you're going to end up doing because outside matters are going to dictate your policy. So, what is World War I? How does it start? And how does the U.S. get involved? So, before we talk about how the U.S. gets involved, let's talk about what is going to cause World War I. First, let's hit the underlying causes of World War I. First, there's going to be something called, or something we call, it is the unification of this country, Germany. Okay, so if you went back in time to pre-1871, Germany's not going to look like Germany. Germany would look something like this. Even this is a little bit too united pre-1871, but Germany's essentially a bunch of smaller nations that share a common Germanic language, but they have their own political structure and they have their own economic system. Well, what begins to happen in the mid 1800s is these wars of German unification where one country will fight another, other countries will give up power to join with another country, and basically all these separate countries are going to merge into a single country of Germany. So 1871, Germany is going to be created out of what was a bunch of smaller countries. Well, this might not seem like a big issue, but it is going to be because these countries before unification were all very industrial, they were all very populated, and for its size, Germany is going to be resource rich. So none of this really mattered when they're their own separate countries, but once you get them united, now we're going to have this population, these resources, this industry, this economy under a single government, and this is going to make Germany an extremely powerful country. So before, a bunch of tiny kingdoms, or tiny kingdoms, tiny states, they have somewhat power economic, somewhat power military, but they're more dealing with one another. But now they become united. All their economies are going to merge into one. Their industry is going to merge into one. And we're going to see this population, resources, industry can now be directed in a single direction, except and not just against separate German states. So Germany will unite, and almost immediately it's going to become extremely powerful. Okay, it's going to rival France, Britain, as far as its economy, at least domestic economy, population and resources. But Germany and German leadership realizes that they're never going to catch up with Britain and France because Germany gets into the game too late. All right, so 1871, by the time Germany's formed, France, Britain, not only have they been countries for a long time, but they've been colonizing for a long time. So, American history, we all know that Britain, then England, had colonized North America, taken Canada from France, basically had taken North America, although these 13 colonies had gotten its independence. The British retained control of Canada. And what we had talked about in a previous lecture is during the 1800s, Britain will carve out huge chunks of Africa. They'd previously carved out India, they'd previously carved out Australia. Same thing with France. They had colonized parts of the world in the 1600s, 1700s, especially 1800s. France had essentially taken over West Africa, Indochina, a variety of islands out here in the Pacific Ocean. And this is going to give Britain and France an advantage over pretty much any country in the world because in colonizing these places, what Britain and France are going to do is they're going to take the labor and resources of these countries and devote it to the home country and essentially force the people of these countries to buy their products. So they're going to put in, essentially make these areas part of the home country, but subservient to the home country. France does the same thing. Again, the people of West Africa are going to be forced to mine, work crops, that type of thing for the benefit of France, and they're going to be forced to buy French products. So this colonization had brought the economy of Britain and France to be the most powerful in the world. Again, outside of the United States, but even then, Britain at this point is going to be bigger than the economy of the United States. So these countries have these goods coming in, these resources coming in that other countries do not. And this is going to allow them to build up a substantial military. Britain had the most powerful navy in the world for most of the 1800s. France had a huge, powerful army. And essentially by 1900, these guys have carved out a huge chunk of the world, and they're almost recognizing one another as world power. Initially in the early 1800s, they were always rivals with one another. But towards the end of the 1800s, they sort of look at each other and they say, okay, we're 1A, you're 1A, 1B. I'm going to leave you alone. You leave me alone. We've got our part of the world carved out. You've got your part of the world carved out. And both of them recognize that they're the dominant colonial powers. All right, so these guys take over these huge chunks of the world by really before 1871, they'd grab most of the world. Well, when Germany emerges in 1871, again, they have a powerful economy, large population. They understand that the reason that Britain and France are top of the economic game is because of their colonies are bringing in so much wealth and resources. So Germany, when it emerges as a country in 1871, is going to say, well, we want some too. Well, Germany will try to colonize, try to catch up with Britain and France. But again, when they become a country, essentially most of the world had been colonized by that point. So Germany's going to come in, grab a handful of colonies in Africa, one of the few places that Britain and France hadn't already colonized, grab a few places over here in the Pacific. But these are almost the leftovers. There's not a lot of resources in these regions. The population, it's more difficult to control militarily than Britain and France, the place they're colonizing. So Germany is not going to have as much coming in as Britain and France. So it's a powerful country. But because they don't have colonies, Germany's not going to ever be able to catch up to Britain and France. And the German people recognize this by 1900. We're essentially going to be a second-rate country. We're going to be inferior to Britain and France because we don't have colonies. And again, we grabbed a couple places, but it's not what Britain and France have. Well, the German people, German leadership doesn't like this. They don't like being second tier to Britain and France. So Germany's going to determine, if I want to get first tier status, which German people do, how the heck can I get there if these guys already have the colonies and everywhere in the world's pretty much colonized by this point? What can I do? Well, Germany will determine that if the world's already been chopped up and it's, one colonial power rules this area, one colonial power rules this area, and colonies are what brings you power, then the only way to get colonies is to take them from someone else. So, what German leadership will begin to do in the late 1800s is it's going to start militarizing. It will start devoting a significant portion of its budget to scientific research, to military research, and it's going to start building a huge army. And eventually, we'll talk about this in a second, a huge navy. And it's going to start emphasizing this cultural attachment to the military. So, we in Germany are going to become more powerful militarily because eventually we're probably going to go to war with Britain or France, either to take territory directly from them or to take their colonies from them, because we don't feel we should have second tier status to these countries. So Germany begins this huge militarization shortly after unification, and it's going to become so synonymous with their culture that in 1891 there's a world fair in Chicago. So what these world fairs are is basically, you meet up to show off exhibits, technology, that type of thing. As a matter of fact, this is during the time of electricity, when that's a big deal. This is held in Chicago, but each country is going to set up an exhibit at these world fairs to demonstrate what their country's all about. Well, 1891, the United States creates this huge electrical hall where, the U.S., its thing is we're at the forefront of technology. So it's just this lit up hall filled with light bulbs, things like that. France, what they're going to do is they're going to set up a garden, we're sort of the forefront of nature, science, that type of thing. I think Tahiti, they have dancers. I believe Mexico puts up this Aztec pyramid, to honor their indigenous ancestry. So all these various countries set up, this is what our culture is about. Germany brings big ass guns to the 1891 World Fair. That's just what Germany is. And they're going to begin this militarization. And you're going to have Britain and France see this militarization. What do you think Britain and France are going to do when they see Germany do this? Well, they're going to get nervous because they understand what Germany's doing. They understand that they're militarizing for a future war with Britain and France. And so what Britain and France are going to do is they're going to start building their own weapons. One of the big things Germany builds, by the way, is these huge battleships, because they determine that Britain and France are able to maintain their colonies because they have these powerful navies. So Germany starts building battleships, because if we're going to take colonies, we got to make sure our navies are superior to their navies. Well, Britain sees Germany building 3 battleships, and Britain will build 4 battleships. Well, Germany sees that, it builds 5 battleships. Same thing with France. Germany builds 3, France builds 4. And pretty soon you're going to have this arms race throughout Europe. It's going to extend from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. Countries building big artillery weapons, battleships, this type of thing. So what we're seeing here is it's sort of these dominoes being set for a future war. Again, Germany unifying, becoming powerful, and then looking at Britain and France sort of with jealousy. Part of this, is this colonialism. Germany sees Britain and France with all these colonies, realizes we've got to get those colonies if we want to be wealthy, and Germany determining the only way we can do that is through a powerful military. So you have these dominoes stacking up late 1800s, early 1900s. Well, another thing that's going to eventually lead to World War I, or at least it's going to be an underlying cause of World War I, is going to be these secret alliances that start to get formed in Europe, late 1800s, especially early 1900s, where you're going to see a lot of countries seeing the arms race going on, predicting a war is coming, and start making these deals in secret, for this future war. All right. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. So Austria-Hungary, like Germany, is a country that with a large population, not as resource rich, or its industry is not as good as Germany, but it is a very populous country, and you would call it a second tier, third tier nation. Doesn't have colonies like Britain and France, certainly. But Austria-Hungary, large population, some of it is a significant portion, specifically the leadership portion, German speaking. So these guys want to be Britain and France as well. And they're going to look around and say, we're second tier, we got to be first tier, but we can't face up to these guys. Well, Germany will see in Austria-Hungary like-minded people, and Germany and Austria-Hungary, their leadership will essentially make an agreement that, hey, we both want to be first here. If we either of us gets into war with Britain, France, whoever, we're gonna ally with one another. Sort of second tier guys, we're gonna ally with one another, fight together, and sort of ride to the top together. Okay. So you're going to have this secret alliance. It's not going to be made public, but basically Germany's going to agree to go to war if Austria-Hungary's attacked. Austria-Hungary will agree with its bestie, Germany, to go to war if it's attacked. You'll kind of see the same thing, or for our purposes here, Turkey, this Ottoman Empire, as it's called then. Same deal. We're second, third tier nation. If you guys go to war, we'll end up joining you in a way to get ours, if we go to war. So you see Germany, Austria-Hungary uniting secretly, and again, you see these guys start mobilizing, arms race, that type of thing. Well, obviously, this mobilization is going to make the neighbors of these countries worried. In particular, Russia. Now, we're not going to talk too much about Russia, but just know they're a weaker nation when compared to Britain and France and Germany. Very large nation, but they don't have the industry and they're not mobilizing their resources like other countries. So Russia's going to look over here, see Germany and Austria-Hungary, and it makes them incredibly nervous. It's like, if these guys start getting big, they obviously want to take territory, they can push in here, and they're getting scared of it. And specifically, they're getting scared of Germany because Germany's becoming extremely powerful. So Russia sees Germany as nervous. France sees Germany and is nervous. Germany's right over here. They can invade us. So in secret, France and Russia will have a secret alliance. If Germany attacks you, Russia, France will attack Germany from this side. And then the same thing. If Germany attacks me and France, Russia, you're going to come in on my side from this side. So France and Russia will make a secret alliance with one another. Now, France and Britain, again, these guys are the big dogs. They're essentially going to have an alliance as well. Now, it's a little bit more complicated. I'm portraying it here, but Britain and France both realize Germany's a threat, and as it's becoming increasingly powerful, if it invades France, or if its navy gets bigger than Britain and France's, it could take them over. So Britain and France will essentially make a secret alliance. Again, not public, secret. So France and Russia make an alliance. Britain and France make an alliance. So what this means, if war comes, even though they don't know that they're allied, essentially Russia and Britain are allied through France. So what you're going to see is this huge series of alliances form. You'll see a lot of other smaller countries allied as well. For example, Serbia. We'll talk about this a lot more in a little bit here. But Serbia is allied with Russia in secret because Russia likes to promote Serbia, which is a fairly new country, because it causes chaos down here in southern Austria-Hungary. And so they promise Serbia, if Austria-Hungary goes to war with you, we'll go to war with Austria-Hungary. So you have these secret alliances all throughout Europe. German unification, colonialism, militarization, secret alliances. Just imagine these as dominoes being set up throughout Europe. So these are underlying causes. What's going to push these dominoes over? Well, this is going to be something that happens on June 28th, 1914. What this is going to be this assassination that will occur in Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary is not like Germany. Essentially, Austria-Hungary, earlier in the 1800s and even before then, you'd basically seen this empire take over a variety of different ethnicities. So if you go to Austria-Hungary, if you went to Austria-Hungary in the early 1900s, you would see people of essentially German ancestry, Hungarian ancestry, Roma people, Serbians, Bosnians. You're going to see all these different groups, these different languages, Czechs, Slovaks, that type of thing, within Austria-Hungary. And it's essentially unified under this Austrian leadership. What it would do is basically, through military might, force these various peoples to listen to its government. So Austria-Hungary had military control of this region, But a lot of people within Austria-Hungary weren't happy to be a part of Austria-Hungary, in particular because Austrian-Hungarian leadership would not allow everybody to participate in the government. So it was mainly people of German ancestry could participate in the government. People on the edge of Austria-Hungarian were treated as essentially lesser than. You would go to Serbian areas, we'll talk about this in a second, and they couldn't vote, participate in government. And so essentially they see themselves as part of the Austria-Hungarian Empire, but they don't necessarily like to be a part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So it's being held together through military force. Well, obviously, a lot of people who are unable to participate in the government aren't happy with the situation. And you're going to have throughout Austria-Hungary these people that are pushing for independence. And it's particularly going to be strong down here in southern Austria-Hungary, in this place that's filled with Serbs, this Serbian ethnicity. So people of, slightly different skin color, hair color, different language, different culture than the rest of Austria-Hungary. They don't like that they're not able to participate in the government. Well, the situation in southern Austria-Hungary is particularly problematic because you have these ethnic Serbs down here. They're being oppressed by Austrian-Hungarian leadership. And at the same time, they look right to their east. This new country has been formed by people of their ethnicity and language. So southern Austria-Hungary has Serbians, forcefully kept part of the empire. But these guys, all they have to do is look to the east and see, hey, our people, our culture, our language, they're running their own country. And so a lot of Serbians here in southern Austria-Hungary would love if this area broke away from Austria-Hungary to join with Serbia. The Serbian government would like this as well. So Serbia, not very powerful country, just recently formed, but primarily made up of ethnic Serbian, Serbian language, that type of thing. They want southern Austria-Hungary to break away because they want to grow Serbia. It would make Serbia more powerful and would bring all the people of this ethnicity under a single government. So Serbia wants this, the people of southern Austria-Hungary want this, and it looks like in 1914, eventually this might happen because there's this growing revolutionary talk in southern Austria-Hungary, some of which is funded by the Serbian government. So they fund groups like this Black Hand we'll talk about in a second, that's spreading revolutionary propaganda. Let's break away from Austria-Hungary. So Serbia is supporting these independence movements, and it looks like this might grow into something eventually. Well, to sort of cut this off, we're going to see the next in line for Austrian-Hungarian leadership, this guy Franz Ferdinand. So his father is controlling the Austrian-Hungarian Empire at this point, but as soon as he dies or retires, Archduke Ferdinand is going to take over Austria-Hungary. Well, Franz Ferdinand sees the situation in southern Austria-Hungary with the Serbians, and he thinks he has a solution to deal with this. So what Ferdinand wants to do is he's going to say, as soon as I take over, we're going to extend voting power. We're going to involve in the government the Serbians. So the thought process here being, you guys don't have to rebel because you're going to be at the table. We're no longer going to leave you out. So you don't have to rebel. You're going to have a seat at the table. So that should solve the problem. Ferdinand seems like a reasonable solution, and he proposes this 1914, and he's going to say, as soon as I take over, this will be carried out. So this is going to make some people in southern Austria-Hungary happy. Some Serbians are going to say, that's all we were asking for, just to be a part of the empire. Some people in southern Austria-Hungary, however, don't like this because they want to be a part of Serbia with the rest of the ethnic Serbians. So they hear about this, they're going to grow upset because if Ferdinand takes power, this ends any hope that this area will be joining with Serbia. Serbian leadership doesn't like it either because, again, they want to bring this area into Serbia. So it looks like if this guy takes power, he's going to make the people here too happy for a revolution to break out. So in 1914, this is going to end up being a problem because Ferdinand will announce, I'm going to, as part of my plan, I'm going to take a tour of southern Austria-Hungary, my empire, and I'm going to have a parade here in Sarajevo, the capital area of the southern part of Austria-Hungary, in sort of to promote my new plan. All right, so some of Franz Ferdinand's advisors will tell him, we don't think that's a good idea. There are a lot of people down there that don't like you, don't like the plan. Ferdinand's going to be, that's ridiculous. I'm giving people greater freedom. I'm bringing them closer to the empire. I'm giving them power in politics. They love me down there. Some of his leadership's going to say, I don't know, I would not go. And again, this is ridiculous. This is my empire. I'm going to go down there. So he will head down there anyway. And word is going to spread that on June 28th, 1914, Ferdinand will be at this parade in Sarajevo. Well, Serbia, again, not liking Ferdinand's plan because it takes away their hope of connecting southern Austria-Hungary to Serbia, will start pumping money into this Black Hand organization, which is a revolutionary group down here in southern Austria-Hungary that doesn't, again, like Ferdinand's plan because they want to join with Serbia. And the government of Serbia will start funding this Black Hand, and they're going to set up a bunch of assassins along this parade route that Ferdinand will be taking. So we don't want this area. We want this area to break away. It's not going to happen if these people are happy. Ferdinand's going to carry this plan out. So let's assassinate Ferdinand before he can take power and carry out his plan. So they fund this Black Hand, and you'll see these various assassins take up along this parade route. Now, it's kind of interesting. Serbia does not want word to get back to Austria-Hungary that they're funding this group, obviously, because Serbia is a much weaker nation than Austria-Hungary. So if Austria-Hungary had a reason to invade Serbia, they probably could do it with ease. They could probably easily take over Serbia. So they're doing this clandestinely. They're basically hiring these guys under the table to assassinate Ferdinand. All right, well, June 28th comes along. Ferdinand, against the advice of his advisors, is going to go on this parade with his wife. And when his car leaves, he's going to very soon run into a potential assassin. So his cars will start driving along here. There's going to be a group of assassins right by this river. One of the assassins will attempt to throw a grenade into Ferdinand's car. The grenade misses. It bounces off the door of Ferdinand's car, ends up exploding the car behind him. Well, at this point, the assassin is going to run away. He doesn't want to get caught because he doesn't want to get tortured. He doesn't want the information to get back that he's been funded by the Serbian government. So this assassin's going to run away. He's going to try to jump into the river to kill himself eventually. It's actually interesting because the Black Hand recruited people that are terminally ill because they wanted them to kill themselves so word doesn't get back that Serbia's been funding this thing. So this guy is terminally ill, tries to jump into this river, either to escape or to kill himself. He jumps in the river. The river's actually very short or very shallow. When he lands in the river, he ends up breaking his legs, but doesn't kill himself. The guy has a pistol on his waist. He tries to get the pistol out, shoot himself in the head. The pistol malfunctions. He had a cyanide caplet that he was going to take to kill himself. But I think what happened is the cyanide capsule broke when he fell. So Austrian-Hungarian leadership ends up capturing this guy. So after they capture that guy, Ferdinand basically breaks off. He realizes, you guys were right. I'm going to get assassinated. He speeds off, and he's going to try to make his way back to the hotel. Parade's over. I don't want to get killed. Well, he drives around. His driver apparently wasn't familiar with Sarajevo. He's going to get lost. Archduke Ferdinand will be driving around for 30 minutes, next couple hours, something like that, unable to get back to the hotel. Eventually, he's going to start making his way here, and his driver will bring him into this area that there's no immediate exit from. So he's going to bring him into this area. And it's at this point that another assassin, so after the failed attempted assassination, Ferdinand speeds off. Assassins further down the parade route that have been stationed by the Black Hand are going to say, I guess we missed our chance. Well, one of those who missed his chance is going to be this guy, Gavrilo Principe. He was, remember the Black Hand, again, further on the parade route to assassinate Ferdinand. Well, he learns that Ferdinand is sped off, and so he goes off and he goes to get a sandwich. It's not actually a sandwich, I think it's a meat pastry. But I like to imagine that Gavrilo Principe went into a Subway, got a $5 footlong. He's sitting there chomping on the sandwich, eating this thing. When out of nowhere, he sees Ferdinand's car pull into this alley and start to turn around, do one of those turns, you'll see where somebody turns and they have to back up and turn, then back up, then turn, then back up. And Gavrilo Principe, he drops his Subway sandwich. Again, probably not a sandwich, but drops whatever he's eating, and he realizes, I have a chance to assassinate this guy. Principe will then pull out a pistol. He's going to shoot Archduke Ferdinand, killing him, and he's going to try to escape. Eventually, Principe will be caught. Not just him, but that other assassin as well. Well, Principe will be interrogated, and through him and his cohorts, they're going to learn, the Austrian-Hungarian government is going to learn that Serbia had been funding the Black Hand. So now Austrian-Hungarian leadership is going to be in this position. What do I do now? Well, they're going to make demands of Serbia, basically saying, we want you to give us this, give us this, give us this. One of these demands essentially is going to make Serbia part of Austria-Hungary, and that's going to start this sort of domino towards war.
So after Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, Austria-Hungary is going to declare war on Serbia, invade Serbia. At this point, Serbia will call up its buddy Russia. Russia will then declare war on Austria-Hungary. Germany will then declare war on Russia. France will declare war on Germany. And Great Britain soon thereafter is going to declare war on Germany as well. Germany, almost immediately, its surface navy is going to be wiped out by the British surface navy. A little bit of navy will be left by Germany, but for the most part, Germany's navy that had been building up over the past couple decades will be gone. So Germany is left without, battleships, things like that. Fortunately for Germany, unfortunately for British shipping, Germany has been building up these U-boats or submarines for the past decade or so. And these submarines, not very effective at destroying enemy battleships or enemy surface ships. Basically, if a surface ship is by a submarine and they detect a submarine, all they got to start doing is dropping depth charges, and the depth charges will blow up the submarine. So submarines, their main tactical advantage will be blowing up enemy cargo ships. So Britain, France, they rely on supplies coming from their colonies, copper, iron, whatever, food. In the case of Britain, that's going to be a big deal. Coming from, African colonies, Australia, India, wherever, they start going up to France and Britain. They're going to start getting cut off by these German submarines. Now, again, German submarine, if it's lucky, it can maybe take out a surface ship, but these submarines back then, they were diesel engine, which means that they can only be underwater for a short period of time. So if there's a British surface ship in the area, that submarine is not going to risk, a lot of times it's not going to risk firing at the surface ship. Sometimes it will, but a lot of times it's just going to take off and then go wait for the next cargo ship to come by, and it'll blow that up. Well, the Germans aren't going to have a great time in the naval area, although this area on this map, this is basically where they're going to be blowing up these ships coming in. They'll also be down here off the coast of France as well. What the Germans will, at least initially, be successful in is the invasion of France. So Germany, building up its military for a long time, got a large population. The second France declares war, what Germany will do is it's going to send a good chunk of its military straight through neutral Belgium. And when it sends this army into Belgium, the objective is going to be, we pass through Belgium, we get to Paris, we take out Paris really quickly, then we either get the French to surrender a chunk of France to us, or maybe sign over a bunch of colonies to us. Once that happens, war will be won. So basically Germany thinks, we want to win this thing quickly. The best way to do that is to get to Paris. Well, initially this is going to look like it's successful. German soldiers pass through Belgium very quickly, very easily. But unfortunately for Germany, They don't have Henry Ford. They don't have the capability to produce, motorized vehicles in mass, and so the German military is going to be slowed down by the fact that most of the men are on horseback marching. Their supplies are being brought by horse and buggy. Can't move very fast. So what this is going to mean is that the British are going to be able to land troops in France before the Germans can reach Paris. The French will start digging these defenses, and the British and the French are going to start inhabiting these trench lines to block Paris. So when the Germans start coming in, they're going to find the British and French have dug these huge trenches. And as the Germans proceed towards them, the British and French will be, just barely sticking up above these trenches with machine guns, sniper rifles, stuff like that. So as the Germans move in, they're going to start seeing their men mowed down, not being able to take out very many of the enemies. Well, Britain and France will, see this happening. The Germans are going to sort of fall back, and this is going to get the British and French to try to push the advantage, push the Germans back to Germany, but they'll find that Germany has itself dug a bunch of trenches, and what's going to happen is we are going to see on this western front over here this trench warfare take over for really the next couple years. Basically, France and Britain are going to build its trenches. The Germans will build their trenches. They're going to extend all the way from the Alps to the ocean. And it's going to be very difficult for either side to push against the enemy's trenches because, again, these guys are barely, you can barely see them. These guys manning the machine guns. And if you try to push against the trenches, you're going to lose a lot of men. So both sides are going to try to come up with ways to break this trench warfare. Before we actually get to that, you probably have heard a lot about the horrors of these trenches. A lot of that is absolutely true, especially when they first are built. Basically, you're going to be, if you're a soldier, you're thrown up on the front lines. And if you're up here, sometimes for a week, sometimes longer, sometimes 4 days or so. But you go up here, and you're going to be exposed for the next couple days, weeks even, to just horrendous things that the human brain has never heard of before. Constant gunfire, explosions, and you're not going to be able to get very much sleep. You're going to see buddies who pop their head up out of the trench, get shot, killed, and you're going to realize that this is just the most dangerous area really that humanity could possibly imagine. And obviously you're going to see a lot of people suffer long-term mental defects because of this. You're also going to see people start suffering physical problems because of this, as disease will become rampant here. So these trenches are going to get all muddy, gross. Latrines are not going to be built properly at first, and so you'll have sewage, feces, urine everywhere. Dysentery, other types of diseases will spread rapidly in these trenches, and so pretty horrendous place to live. Now, you're going to only be in here a couple days, again, maybe a couple weeks. You'll be rotated to back lines after that, and back lines after that, so the thought process is, if the enemy comes, takes the first line of trenches, there's a second line immediately behind them. So second, tier, third tier, not as horrific as the front tier, but still pretty terrible. Eventually, you'll be rotated out of the front, but during that time you're there, it's going to be pretty awful. Well, how are you going to get across these trenches knowing that you're going to lose a lot of men? Well, both sides will try this over-the-top tactic where they basically send a lot of men across. Hey, if it takes a lot of men to take the territory, let's send a lot of men. Well, both sides are going to quickly realize we're going to run out of men really quickly if we do this, and we're not going to win the war if it takes us losing, 25 men to their one man lost to take a mile of territory. We're simply going to run out of people. So both sides realize this isn't the way to do it. So both sides are going to design some pretty horrific weapons to try and take out these trenches. We first see flamethrowers from World War I. Now, problem with flamethrowers is if you get to a trench, you're going to be able to be very effective, but you got to go across no man's land to get over there. You're a huge target with this explosive, flammable liquid on your back, and so if you get hit, you and the guys next to you get lit on fire, basically explosion hazard. Other times, or throughout the war actually, we're going to see these huge artillery guns be deployed by both sides. So if we want to take those trenches, let's clear them out of men first, and so let's bombard it with artillery shells for, whatever, a couple hours beforehand, hoping that everybody over that side dies, and then we don't have to deal with machine guns and sniper rifles as people come across because everybody over there is dead. Well, that would be good, I guess, in the context of war, but the problem is artillery is very inaccurate, and so sometimes you think you'd be bombarding this area of trenches, you send your guys over, nope, these guys are just fine, and your men get mowed down in no man's land. No man's land being the area between the trenches. You even get big artillery as big as a train car. They get so big. Germany will try to come up with something called mustard gas because it's got this mustard garlic smell to take out the other guys on the other side. Problem with mustard gas, problem I guess, but the good thing for Germany when they use it is that it's going to melt the other side's lungs, effectively killing them. So if you launch it over the enemy's trenches, you're going to clear out those trenches. Well, the British and French are going to come up with their own version of this, and so we're going to start seeing this being put in play early in this trench warfare. Problem is, you launch the gas at the opposing trench, wind blows the other way, now your own soldiers are exposed to it. Other problem is very easily countered. You just throw on a gas mask and you're going to be fine. Both sides will try to deploy these new airplanes, so depending whether you're French or the United States or Americans will say they invented lighter than air flight. The French will say they did it. Whoever's first, we see these lighter than aircraft starting to be designed in the early 1900s, and by the start of World War I, we're going to have people try to use these things as war, for war. Some people will try to use them for bombing, but problem is these airplanes are incredibly fragile. The technology is not there to lift heavy things off the ground, so you're barely going to be able to lift one or two humans off the ground. Lifting bombs that will cause substantial damage to the enemy trenches isn't going to be feasible. Couple little things here. You can do strafing runs, but initially, how are we going to fire at them? Well, you'd have people firing handguns out of planes at people on the ground, and actually sometimes you'd see these dog fights where people are firing at each other with handguns. They try to put basically a Gatling gun at the front of each of these planes. Initially, the problem is that bullets hit the propeller, either mess up the propeller or send bullets flying back at the pilot. Eventually, they're going to figure out a way to time the gun to where it doesn't hit the propellers, but still, that's going to be a danger that's there with these planes. So you will have some dog fighting in World War I, but probably the biggest use for planes is going to be scouting. Go to the other guys' trenches, see where their soldiers are, where they aren't, and then, whenever you run across no man's land, you go to the places where there are fewer enemy soldiers. This is a composite photo of World War I, what a scene might look like, going across no man's land. So we do have a different version of lighter than aircraft. This is going to be these Zeppelins that the Germans developed. What these Zeppelins will do is they can lift heavy bombs, so you can actually get a lot of explosives up in these things, and Germany will start sending these bombers out across enemy trenches, even across the English Channel to London. Problem with these things is that Germany only has hydrogen available to fill these things with, very explosive, so all you got to do to shoot these things out of the air is load your planes up with tracer rounds, and these things are going to go up in flames. Some of these things will be used for scouting, stuff like that, but again, the practical nature of them is limited. We see both sides start using tanks in this war. Again, the problem here is going to be the technology is not there to make these things very effective. They're going to be incredibly slow. They're going to use a lot of gas. There's going to be design flaws initially. The enemy can just come up to the side of these things, plant explosives on them. You can't shoot at them. Well, all right, well, fine. We'll put little side gunners. Well, that makes these things heavier and slower. These things will flip over sometimes. And you had the fact they didn't know how to use them effectively until late in the war. Basically, they would have them serve as almost shields to infantry falling behind them. So it's not going to be the thing where we start seeing flanking maneuvers, these things all over the battlefield that you're going to see in later wars. So limited effectiveness, gonna be used, to some success, but for the most part, not going to break this trench warfare. So this over here on this Western Front, almost a stalemate, or pretty much a stalemate. Very little moving back and forth. 1914, 1915, 1916, and again, fighting out at sea. We'll talk a little bit about this Eastern Front over here, but not much movement over here on the Western Front. Well, while all this is going on, the United States is going to adopt this policy of neutrality. So at the time, President Wilson, he would be Democrats, generally anti-imperialist. We don't want to deal with international matters, as we'll talk about throughout this and next lecture. Wilson wants to settle or work on domestic things, but international affairs are going to constantly grab his attention. But he would rather deal with things at home. So I'm not in this war. U.S. declares neutrality, and this is also a good stance because neutral nations can generally profit when two nations are at war because both sides are going to pay a premium price for goods. So the U.S. has all this manufactured goods, all this raw resources, and Britain and France, Germany will pay a very heavy price to get this stuff. So U.S. is in a good position to make a lot of money. So Wilson declares neutrality. What that means depends on who you're asking. There's no United Nations, there's no international body setting the rules for neutrality. So it's basically what the country declaring neutrality thinks is neutral. They're going to kind of hope that the other nations recognize that this is what a neutral nation can do. So the way U.S. understands neutrality is that the U.S. cannot obviously fight for either side. We can't let its citizens fight for Germany or on the opposite side, Britain or France. You can't let either nation use, their ships use your ports, at least their combatant ships use your ports. But what the U.S. thinks is that it should be able to send non-war materials to either side, and neither side should be able to stop them. So cotton, iron, stuff like that. You can send it to Germany, Britain, France. Now, hypothetically, you get a private U.S. businessman. Let's say he's making, shoes, and he's going over to Germany. Hypothetically, a British ship naval ship could stop him. But if that British naval ship searches the ship, determines there's just shoes on board, that British naval ship is supposed to let this ship go. So the U.S. thinks, as a nation, I can't give things to either side to support the war, but my private citizens can sell non-war materials to whoever they please. Now, the U.S. thinks that its citizens should also be able to sell war materials to either side, but they understand that if these war materials are stopped by one of the combatants, then that ship and what it's carrying are subject to seizure. So let's say Joe Remington, whoever the heck is making Remington firearms, is sending a ship full of guns to Germany. If a British ship stops Joe Remington's ship, determines, these are guns going to our enemy, they can seize the weapons, maybe even seize Joe Remington's ship. They're not going to hurt the sailors or anything. They don't want to, upset the U.S. by killing its citizens. But, Joe Remington will be out of all this money he paid for these guns and his ship. And he can go complain to Wilson, but Wilson's going to say, that's the British right to do that as a warring nation. You took this risk. Now, again, if Remington got those guns to Germany, Germany would probably pay a high price for it. But he understands that he's taking that risk in shipping these things. So it's a gamble that we're going to see some Americans will take shipping arms to one side or another. So U.S. declares neutrality. Well, this neutrality is going to very obviously favor the British because Britain's physically closer, and as we're going to talk about, Germany really can't stop American ships from getting to Britain. So if you look at, let's go here. So let's say a U.S. ship full of Joe Remington's guns wants to get to Germany. It's going to have to pass through this area, and this is going to be an area where Britain will just put a ton of surface ships. And so let's say maybe 1 out of every 2 times, just playing with numbers here, Joe Remington's ships will be stopped by Britain before it gets to Germany, and they're going to have their weapons seized. This is going to make it a lot less likely that he's going to take the risk to try and ship this stuff to Germany. Well, if Joe Remington wanted to ship guns to Britain, there's not going to be any surface ships to stop them. So Germany does have U-boats. Problem with these U-boats is they are slow, and they're only really good at blowing up cargo ships. Now, Germany does not want to blow up American cargo ships because they don't want to kill Americans, because they don't want to draw Americans in this war. So let's say an American ship's heading, Joe Remington's ship's heading to Britain with guns. A German submarine stops them right here. Hey, Joe Remington, slow down. Let me inspect your ship. Those guns are ours. Well, Joe Remington say, nope, sorry, just scoot around the German submarine. German submarine can't do anything because it's slower than the cargo ship. Guns get to Britain. Again, the German ship could hypothetically blow up Joe Remington's ship, but that's U.S. is going to regard that as a violation of its neutrality. It might lead to war. So Germany's not going to be able to stop really any U.S. ships from getting to Britain or France, but Britain's going to be able to stop a good chunk of ships going carrying war materials from getting to Germany. And as we're going to see, Britain's not just going to stop ships bringing war materials, because very quickly both sides are going to start violating U.S. neutral rights. So the way the British are going to do it is going to be less offensive to the United States, but it's still going to cost the U.S. a lot of money. So right after the U.S. starts shipping war materials or shipping materials to both sides, what Britain will do is it's going to mine the German North Sea. Now, the main reason for this is to prevent what's left of the German Navy from getting out, but they also don't want stuff getting into Germany. Now, Britain doesn't want an American ship hitting one of these mines because that might lead the U.S. into war. We just talked about the Spanish-American War. Basically, the United States declared war on Spain because they thought a Spanish mine blew up one of their ships, although that was a naval ship, and this would be hypothetically a private ship. But whatever the case, you got a lot of people. You don't want the Americans to get in this war, whether killing their citizens or their naval ships. So after the British mine this, they say to the American merchants, we don't want you to die, you don't want to die. So if you're shipping stuff to Germany, you just pull into Britain here. We're going to give you a pilot, and we'll give you a map to avoid these mines so you can get to Germany around this stuff. Well, U.S. ships will start pulling into British ports. Now the British have an opportunity to inspect them, and they don't even have to stop them bringing in war materials to Germany, because now they're coming in to them to inspect for war materials. So any ship bringing war materials automatically going to be seized here. We don't even need to worry about stopping them with our Navy. And almost immediately, Britain is going to start redefining what it means to be a war material. So U.S. assumes cotton, iron is not a war material, but Britain will start saying, no, cotton can be turned into uniforms, iron can be turned into tanks, so we think those are war materials. So when the U.S. ships start pulling in here, the British will start seizing these weapons, or seizing these non-war materials, as the U.S. would define them, and saying they're war materials. Now, Wilson is going to be upset by this. He's going to complain to the British, you're taking away our private citizens, their goods. These are non-war materials. You're violating our neutral rights. But the British are going to risk this because they don't want these goods getting to Germany, and they don't think the U.S. will declare war over a couple goods being seized, by the British. So the British basically gamble U.S. isn't going to go to war over this, and they don't. Wilson complains, but this isn't enough to agitate the United States any more than that. The Germans, however, are going to violate U.S. neutral rights in a way that is unintentional, but it's going to be taken as a lot of offense by the United States. So German submarines, they start operating in these waters outside of Britain and France, and what the German leadership is going to tell these German submarines is, blow up cargo ships, okay? If you see a British or a French flag, or Russian, hypothetically, or any of the Allied nations' flags, ship flying those, blow these things up. So we want to deny Britain from getting food from their colonies, materials from their colonies. Same thing with France. So you see a British flag, French flag flying above a ship, go ahead and blow them up. Well, Germany will start doing this with great effect very early in the war. Problem is going to come is that there's some difficulty determining what's a passenger ship and a cargo ship. So Cargo ships made for carrying stuff, copper, weapons, whatever. Passenger ships made for carrying people. So part of this war is going to be war of, not necessarily propaganda, but public perception. So Germany is going to tell its submarine captains, try to avoid blowing up British or French passenger ships. If it happens, though, it happens. We'd prefer you not to blow them up. So if it's made for carrying people, if it's like the Titanic, although that was blown up a little bit before this, but or not blown up, but sunk by an iceberg. But if it's something that's made for carrying people, try to avoid it. Well, problem for submarines is that you can't tell as you're floating around out there looking up through a periscope, what type of ship it is. And so Germany recognizes there's a chance we'll accidentally blow up passenger ships, and they also know that British and French passenger ships sometimes carry neutral passengers like the United States. So imagine today Britain and Peru, we'll just say Peru, go to war. Britain has got, British Airways. Americans obviously fly British Airways all the time. Well, Peru, this is a target possibly. They don't want to blow up Americans flying British Airways, so they're going to say, hey, whatever, passengers, don't fly on this because we could potentially attack it in this war or whatever. Just hypothetical. Well, same thing's going to happen here. British passenger ships are going to be bringing American passengers occasionally, and the Germans know that their submarine captains will see these British and French ships. They don't want Americans to die on this because, again, they don't want Americans to get drawn in the war. So what Germany will start doing is placing newspaper advertisements out in American newspapers saying, hey, Americans, we're at war with Britain. We're going to start sinking their ships. We don't want to blow you guys up, so please don't travel on British and French ships. Well, Americans, they don't listen very well, and they're going to say, whatever, we'll travel where we want. And we're going to have about 120 Americans decide to travel on this British ship, the Lusitania. Again, it's a passenger ship made for carrying people. And these 120 Americans will be sailing along when a German submarine pops up, sees the Lusitania, sees that it's a British ship, believes it's a cargo ship. German submarines, German leadership, hey, try to avoid passenger ships if you can, but believes it's a passenger or a cargo ship, sees a British flag, fires at Lusitania, sinks it, killing about 1,200 people, including 120 Americans. Well, this is going to be very different than what the British are doing. They're just taking American stuff. Now Germany, inadvertently, but it has taken American lives. Well, Wilson is going to protest to Germany and say, how are you going to atone for this? We said we're neutral and you blew up our people. Germany will try to argue, well, hey, you're traveling on an enemy ship or a ship that belongs to our enemy nation. This is going to happen. But Wilson says, you've got to do something. You can't let this happen again. So in the wake of the Lusitania sinking in 1915, Germany will issue something called the Liner Pledge. It's going to say, we promise not to destroy passenger ships of any nation, including British, French, Russian, including the people we're fighting. If it's a ship made for carrying people, we're going to be extra special, careful not to destroy it. So we promise we're not going to sink these British passenger ships. So Germany makes this promise. And by the way, this is going to open the door for the British and French to simply start shipping as many arms as they want on passenger ships. But Germany's willing to take that hit because they don't want the U.S. to get in this war. So things go fine for 1915, 1916. When something is going to happen in 1916 that's going to once again upset the United States. That is the sinking of this French passenger ship, the Sussex. Okay, the Sussex is not carrying any Americans, but the same thing happened with the Lusitania. A German ship is going to pop up, German submarine, see the Sussex out of its periscope and say, I think that's a cargo ship, so we can shoot it down. They shoot the Sussex. It's not a cargo ship. It's carrying people. 50 people in the Sussex will get killed. And again, the Germans will have sunk a passenger ship. Wilson is going to look at Germany and say, hey, you promised not to sink passenger ships, but look what's happened. Germany will come back. I'm sorry, we didn't mean to. This was a mistake. But again, what are you going to do here? Well, Wilson will come back and say, if this keeps happening, I don't want this to keep happening. So I want you to promise me that you're not going to sink any more cargo ships either. If you're having such a problem sinking cargo ships, defining cargo ships and passenger ships, don't sink either of them. So he asked Germany to basically shelve their submarines, because submarines, if they're not sinking cargo ships, they don't have a job. But Germany will agree to this in this Sussex Pledge in 1916, basically saying, all right, we will not, we won't use this submarines because we don't want the U.S. to come in the war. So they basically agree to no longer sink cargo ships, no longer sink passenger ships. Hypothetically, submarines could still try to sink British destroyers, battleships, whatever, their surface ships, but the submarines aren't very good at doing that. So in 1916, Germany says, to keep the U.S. out of war, we're not going to sink any cargo ships or passenger ships for the time being. Now, Germany makes this, one, because they don't want the U.S. in the war, but also because they think in 1916 there's a decent possibility that they could win the war very soon. And this is because something begins happening in 1916 on the Eastern Front. So Germany, a good chunk of its forces over here fighting Russia, Austria-Hungary is fighting over here as well, but Germany's got a lot of its troops tied up here, so only part of them are over here on the Western Front. Well, Germany looks in 1916 like something's going to free up this the Eastern Front, free up a lot of soldiers to go here to the West. And that's going to be because Russia, more or less, let's just say more or less, is going to drop out of the war in 1916. What happens in 1916 is this workers' advocate, this guy who's going to start calling for an overthrow of the Russian government, will start gaining power. Okay, this guy's name is Vladimir Lenin. Lenin is going to start questioning the Russian system. So prior to 1916, Russia was a monarchy. It was ruled by this Romanov family. They'd rule it for a long time. Basically what we saw in Russia is what we see in a lot of the rest of Europe. The Romanovs and this aristocratic class will control most of the wealth in Russia. Vast majority of Russians aren't going to have very much wealth, and what's going to be especially problematic for some Russians is going to be in Russian industry. So we've talked a little about American industry during the Gilded Age, how work hours were going up while wages were going down. Now in the United States, you had Teddy Roosevelt, you had some successful unions, you had a couple factors step in to make things easier for workers in the U.S. And so the Gilded Age, with the progressive era, kind of ground to a halt, and workers, again, not perfect, but things had gotten significantly better in the early 1900s. Again, Teddy Roosevelt and those other things we've talked about before. That's not going to happen with Russia. Russia doesn't have a Teddy Roosevelt. They have Romanovs. They have people that don't really care about workers. So in Russian industry, basically in the early 1900s, all those problems continued to get worse. Workers, working long hours of the day for very little money. Pay's continuing to go down. Well, this is going to become especially problematic in 1914. Russia gets involved in this war, throwing men against Austria-Hungary and Germany. And so let's imagine we have a Russian coal mine. There's 5 workers here: Bob, Bill, Steve, Tom, and Dan. I don't know, probably not going to remember those in a second, but Tom and Dan, they're called up to go to war. Tom goes to Austria-Hungary, Dan goes to Germany. Well, Bill, Steve, and Tom, they're sitting here working at the coal mines. They're not going to have to make up for the 2 workers that have left. So that means the work hours are going to go up significantly. You got to make up for the work for the people that have gone. So let's say they were working 10 hours, 11 hours before. Now they're working 16 hours a day. Well, Russia, the demands of war, we need more coal because we need, our trains to get going. We need, coal to heat soldiers' camps, that type of thing. So coal production has to increase. So Bill, Tom, and Dan, or whatever the heck those 3 guys' names were, Steve, they are now going to have to work even more hours. So now they're working 18, 19 hours a day in these horrendous conditions for a war that they don't even know why they're fighting. Well, Lenin is going to come along and say, this war is stupid, we need to get out of it, And as a matter of fact, you shouldn't be working these hours a day, all these hours, because you're seeing such little pay, and the only people that are making money off of it are the wealthy, the aristocrats, the Romanovs. What we should do is what Karl Marx had called for before. We should nationalize, all industry, and we should redirect the profits of these means of production for the workers. And he starts advocating this socialist, and even he's going to call this communist. We should have a communal society where, and again, this philosophy, I'm being very generic here, where everybody has roughly the same wealth. The state takes care of people. The state runs the industries for the benefits of the workers instead of the benefits of the Romanovs and the elites. So Lenin will start making these speeches, start going around calling for radical reform in Russia. These crowds obviously working incredibly hard, start gathering to listen to Lenin. And eventually he's going to form this revolutionary group of workers who are going to rise up against the aristocrats and the Romanovs. And we're going to have this Russian Revolution, or this Bolshevik revolution. Like most revolutions, this thing is going to be incredibly complicated. But I'm going to try and simplify it, just saying workers are going to start rising up against aristocrats. And what we're going to see at one point is these workers are going to basically attack the Romanov palace, kill all the Romanovs. There's some thought that two of the Romanovs, Anastasia and her younger brother, escape. And you have that Disney movie about her plight. I think or not Disney movie, but whatever, DreamWorks movie. She gets away, finds love or whatever, maybe finds a cartoon sidekick or something like that, animal sidekick. And the reason that movie was made is because they never found the bodies. At the point the movie was made, hadn't found the bodies of Anastasia or her little brother, and a woman in France had claimed that she was Anastasia. She had been she'd escaped. So that was the thought, but right after that movie came out, they did some ground-penetrating radar outside the Russian royal palace, and they found Anastasia and her little brother's body. So that Disney movie or DreamWorks or whatever movie, that stuff didn't happen. So sorry, Romanovs. So this is happening in Russia. All this means for this war is basically we've got this country here, 1916, 1917, 1918, even in 1919, you're going to have this thing falling apart. Soldiers, they're going to be not getting paid because, the Civil War going on here, people fighting one another, soldiers deserting, and essentially Russia will cease to be an effective fighter in Germany. When Germany makes that line of pledge, basically they're saying we can take a lot of soldiers here, redivert them over here to this Western Front, and we can win this war pretty easily now that we have the additional soldiers. Well, unfortunately for Germany, they think, again, this Russian Revolution's a positive for them, but they're going to quickly see the additional soldiers aren't going to be enough to break the British and French lines. They do have some successful offenses here, but it's not enough to push through to take Paris. So instead of the Russian Revolution being positive, Germany doesn't get what it wants, and instead Germany's going to be put in a difficult place because a lot of German workers are going to look at what's happening in Russia and say, well, hey, wait a minute, we're working hard too. We're paying up to this Kaiser and his kids and this aristocrats that rule Germany, and we're not seeing the benefits of our labor. Why don't we have our own communist revolution? And so you're going to see this discontent start rising in Germany, with a lot of people talking about overthrowing the government and installing their own communist form of government, or economic system slash form of government. But for those who would yell at me for saying this political system, just economic system. But the way they're going to run things, state controls the economics, and then the workers control the means of production. So what this does, instead of winning the war for Germany, it actually puts a clock on German leadership. We only have a certain amount of time to win this war. Once we win the war, we can, stop our workers from working so much. We can get the soldiers back here, get them working in the industry, so we can decrease work hours for those here back in Germany. So we've got to do that quick enough, win this, before our workers are going to rise up and overthrow our government. So Germany is going to decide by the beginning of 1917 This didn't work. I don't want I've got to win this thing in the next year, 2, 3, something like that, before my people rise up. So German leadership will make the decision to, we've got to win this thing. We're not doing it with the additional soldiers. What we can do is we can start attacking attacking ships going into Britain and France again. Just tell the United States, risk that they're going to get in the war, and basically say, we're going to start sinking not only British ships and French cargo ships, British and French cargo ships, but also British and French passenger ships. And they will say to the United States and basically to the world in February 1917 that what we're going to do now is we're going to sink any ship with our submarines that try to get into Britain and France. The thought process here is we've got to win this quick. We think we might be able to do it if we cut off all supplies going to Britain and France. And they're going to basically say U.S. will even destroy ships with the American flag because that's what we need to win the war. So February 1917, Germany is going to declare unrestricted submarine warfare and say to the United States, any ship coming over here, we're going to blow up even if it's American. Germany knows this is probably going to get the U.S. involved in this war, but they have to take this risk. They say, we understand that U.S. coming in could lose this war, but we're going to lose anyway. Our people are going to rise up if we have to fight it much longer. And what Germany's gambling on here is that before the United States declares war, trains its men, which is going to take a while, and actually gets over here, by that point Germany have already taken Paris, possibly the rest of France, and it can basically, force the French to give them things, and then it can sign peace treaty with Britain. They think they will, or hope they will have won enough by the time the U.S. can get mobilized and get over here to where it won't matter. So they're on a clock. They know this is going to get the U.S. in the war. They think it's going to get the U.S. in the war, but they really don't have another choice. So February 1917, Germany declares this. Wilson, obviously concerned about this. This is going to get a lot of people talking about getting the U.S. in this war. Another thing will happen in February 1917 that's further going to push the U.S. into war, and that's going to be something called the Zimmermann telegram. So Germany's head of foreign relations, I don't know if I have that title right, but a guy named Arthur Zimmermann will send a telegram to Mexico basically saying, we're starting this unrestricted submarine warfare. I think this is going to lead to war with the United States. If that happens, Mexico, we would like to help you regain this area that you lost to the United States in 70 years before in the U.S.-Mexico War. So Mexico, if the United States declares war on Germany, will you declare war on the United States and start taking this region, trying to retake this region? We'll support you however we can. This is a ridiculous proposal, okay? So by this point, or at this time, Mexico's in the middle of its revolution. Basically, it's going through a bunch of different heads of state. These heads of states, are having to fight rebel groups. I mean, the country is falling apart at the seams. It can't mobilize an army to invade the United States because its army's fighting other armies within Mexico. Not only that, by this point, I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm willing to bet the population of these states here outnumbers the total population of Mexico. So even if every single person in Mexico invaded this part of the United States, they're still gonna lose. Just people with guns, in defensive positions can resist an invasion like that. And so it doesn't make sense in that regard. So, and then also, how's Germany going to get stuff over here to help Mexico? Maybe you can ship a couple handguns or something like that on a submarine, but just a handful of things. That's not going to do very much for an invasion force. So Mexico's not in a position to invade the United States. Either Germany didn't have the intelligence to know this, or, I think it's probably a better explanation, they're thinking there's going to be maybe somebody that will get this message, and it might just lead to chaos in the north. Maybe one of these rebel groups will hear this. The prospect of regaining this area will be enticing, and so these revolutionaries will cause border trouble. U.S. Army will not be able to go over to Europe, at least for a time, because it's going to have to be dealing with issues with Mexico. Maybe that's the explanation. Some people think that it was just British made up the Zimmerman telegram, because the British are going to be the ones that capture it and show it to the U.S., and they want to get the U.S. in the war. I think that's been disproven, but this is obviously U.S. is going to hear that Germany is plotting with Mexico or trying to plot with Mexico, and this is going to upset them. So Wilson in February 1917 is now faced with the prospect Germany's about to blow up American ships if they go to Britain and France, and Germany is plotting with Mexico to take American territory. Well, that alone, again, I don't know even if those things are enough to get Wilson to war, because, again, he'd rather focus on domestic issues. But something else is going to happen in February and March 1917. Somebody is going to get in Wilson's ear and say, you're a progressive. You basically want to use the government to help make the United States a better place. Wilson mainly focusing on economic issues, less on social issues, but you could say a little bit of political issues as well. He's an idealist. He basically thinks democracy in Republican government is the best form of government. And what he has been seeing in Europe is, to him, indicative of stuff that's been happening in Europe forever. This is fighting over the same issues that keep coming up time and again. And Wilson seeing, again, each of the sides losing millions of people. And he would like to end this type of war, but, he doesn't really know how. Well, some people get in Wilson's ear and they're going to say, if you enter the war, now we're going to be going against Germany because they're the ones that are most violating our rights at this point. But if we join with Britain and France, this is going to get us a seat at the table for peace negotiations. So we can sit down and we can make sure that Britain, France, and Germany change things so where this type of war doesn't happen again. And if the U.S. enters the war, they can get all sides to maybe agree to join an international body where we can discuss things instead of starting to fight. We can make sure that conditions in Europe are to the point where they're not going to build resentment and we're going to see another war break out over the same issues. We cannot do this if we sit on the sidelines. So let's say this war keeps fighting. Eventually Britain and France beat Germany. U.S. can't then say, you guys need to join the international body. You need to stop, not punish Germany, because Wilson thinks punishing the losing side will cause another war. You can't tell the other side to do that because you didn't participate. If you participate, you can dictate terms at the end of the war. So Wilson will get caught up in this almost international progressivism and this thought that U.S. entry could make the world safe for democracy. We can change things, but only if we enter the war. So Wilson, and he's going to start calling this his Great Crusade to make the world safe for democracy, will decide in March 1917 to enter the war against Germany on the British and French side because he wants to sit at the table when the war is over and basically say, we need to do this to make sure this type of war doesn't happen again. So at the end of March, Wilson goes before Congress, can I have a declaration of war? On April 6, 1917, Congress will vote to declare war on Germany and join the British and French. Now, when this happens, Wilson is going to make clear that he doesn't want, even though he's going to be fighting Germany and the rest of the Axis power, or Central powers, Axis is World War II, he doesn't want to destroy them. Now, Austria-Hungary is starting to fall apart. Same thing with the Ottoman Empire that also joined Germany. But he's going to say, I don't want to shove these guys' head in the mud. And particularly, he's going to speak to Germany, the most powerful of the Central powers. I don't want to punish you. I don't think this is conducive for the future. I just want a peace without victory. He'll use those terms, peace without victory. So we're going in there to win this thing, but we're not going in there to kick anybody in the butt, when we're done. We're basically going to win. We're going to pick up, the Germany and the losing side, and we're going to sort of lead them into this better tomorrow. So U.S. joins the war with sort of this idealism that we're going to change things. We want peace without victory. So we're going in there to win, but we're not going in there to kick butt and humiliate the other side. All right, so U.S. declares war on Germany. Now, the U.S. is going to start contributing to this war in a number of different ways. One way that's not going to be immediately apparent is men. It's going to take a while for the U.S. Army to build up U.S. Army is very small at this time, so you need to train men, get them to boot camp, then start training them on their weapons, and then ship them all the way across the Atlantic. For this reason, 1917, we're not going to see a lot of Americans going over to Europe. It's going to take a while. Most of the men are going to end up showing up in 1918. So 1917, a lot of it's going to be just helping out in other ways. The U.S., now that we're not neutral, is going to start sending allies money and material. So U.S. will raise tax rates significantly. It's going to use some of this tax money to start sending loans to Britain and France. It will start writing checks to American industrialists, guys like Henry Ford. Hey, Henry Ford, stop building your cars, build us airplane engines, build us stuff that we can send to Britain and France, and also we can send with our men when we eventually get over there, start producing these weapons. Well, being paid well by the government, Henry Ford will start producing these weapons of war. Other American manufacturers will do the same thing. U.S. will start also writing checks to farmers. Farmers are actually going to have, for one of the few times in American history, we have this overproduction. You're producing more food than the American people can eat. Well, if the federal government's writing you checks and saying, we need additional food because our soldiers need a lot of calories, and we need food to send to the French and the British, farmers are going to make a decent living at this point. So they're going to start, growing extra crops, things like that. And then the American government will buy it, send it to British and French, and also to American soldiers, boot camp, and when they get over there. It's actually kind of interesting because America's staple crop, or staple grain, is corn. They start sending corn over there. The British, French, they just eat wheat bread. They don't know what corn is. They're like, what the hell do we do with this? So Americans will have to teach them how to eat corn. That's kind of an interesting thing. Another thing we see at the home front is a lot of anti-German sentiment's going to come up. People will, let's stop calling sausages sausages. Let's call them freedom fingers. They'll start saying, let's beat back the Huns. Call the Germans these Huns. They'll stop teaching German in schools, start teaching additional French classes instead. U.S. is actually going to have a lot of issues with free speech. There's going to be something called the Sedition Act that'll come out. Wilson will sign into law saying that if you speak poorly of the U.S. government or undermine its war efforts, you can get arrested for this. This will be a big issue, as is this an impediment of free speech? This is going to be something that will come up later. But again, the big contribution that the U.S. is going to have is in terms of men. So the U.S. starts sending men over. Again, some are going to get there in 1917, but a big chunk are going to get there in 1918. Initially, U.S. starts calling for men. Now, if you listen to people that are older than you, they'll say, well, back in my day, we just ran to war. That's true. Some people are going to automatically volunteer, but a good chunk of Americans are going to have to get drafted. People don't want to go to war. They got to farm to grow crops. They got to support their family. So the U.S. is going to start instituting this draft, to get enough men. As we'll talk about later, as these men get drafted, or again some volunteer, this is going to have changes in the workforce as men start leaving their jobs. But these men start building up. Some 9 million Americans will be called up to fight in this war. And we're going to start seeing them. Again, some arrive in 1917, but most are ending up in 1918. One of the new positions that the U.S. is going to have, the U.S. Army is going to be training its men on, is this Air Corps. So this is going to be the first time U.S. soldiers are going to be in combat. There's, some people point to this thing in Mexico, but first real-time Americans will start seeing air combat as part of this Army Air Corps will be over in Europe. And you're going to have these Americans, guys like this guy, Eddie Rickenbacker, are going to get over there, and they're immediately going to have an effect. Like, American pilots will go up and start downing German and Austrian, Hungarian pilots. And this is going to be pretty surprising to all sides, because usually there's an incredibly steep learning curve with pilots in World War I. So, with the British, French, Germans, Austrian, Hungarians on the other side, what you'll have a lot of times is pilot goes up, they've got some training, but they get up there and they're going to be fodder for the more experienced guys. Now, if those rookie pilots get up there, get a couple flights under their belt, then they'll become experienced, and then they'll be able to easily take out rookie pilots on the other side. But basically, it's like a very good chance you're going to die in your first couple flights in a dogfight or whatever. But if you survive that, then you're going to become experienced. You don't see that with the U.S. as much. You see a lot of Americans go up and immediately start to contribute. Now, this isn't because of superior airplane technology or Americans better training, more hours in the air before this. Some people argue, and I don't know if this is true, but I buy it, is that Americans, a lot of the pilots that are going to go up are more experienced with automobiles. So very few people in Europe own automobiles because it hasn't gotten cheap over there yet, because they don't have the innovations of Henry Ford, stuff like that. So a lot of Americans have a decade plus of automobile experience, using a wheel. Most of these British, French, German, Austrian, Hungarian pilots, they've never done a wheeled vehicle before, a machine that you control, and so they don't have the muscle memory that Americans are going to have. And for this reason, you're going to see guys like Eddie Rickenbacker. He's Americans' leading ace. He gets 26 kills in just a period of 6 months, which is way less than some of the British, French, and German pilots. But if you spread that out over the course of the war, like those guys are going to have, Rickenbacker would have had significantly more kills than even their most experienced guys. And you can kind of maybe explain this because Rickenbacker was a race car driver before getting over there. He'd been in the Indianapolis 500 race a couple times. So American pilots are going to go over there. One of the pilots is actually going to be Teddy Roosevelt's son. So right as soon as the war starts, Teddy Roosevelt, he's actually going to show up at the White House and meet Wilson. From what I understand, this is actually the first time they've met in person, even though they went against each other in the 1912 presidential election. He's going to go up to Wilson and say, I would like to form a cavalry unit and ride across no man's land and kill the Huns. And Wilson's going to be, I think if you try and do that, you're going to get blown to pieces by a machine gun. 2, dude, you're like 62 years old. So Wilson will deny that Roosevelt, permission to go off and fight this war. So even though he's not going to go, his 4 sons will join the military, and his daughter will as well. She becomes an Army nurse. And his sons are all going to perform admirably, but one son, Quentin Roosevelt, he becomes a pilot in the new Army Air Corps. He's flying over German territory when he's going to be shot down. Well, German soldiers will come upon Quentin Roosevelt's body, going to read his dog tags, and they're going to realize, hey, this is President Roosevelt's son. They're going to take a picture of Quentin's body. They're going to send it to German leadership. Well, German leadership will decide to use this as propaganda. Everybody, Roosevelt's this tough guy. He's got this reputation around the world, but we've just killed this warrior president's son. So they'll start printing this photograph out, sending it to German soldiers on the front lines. Look what we accomplished. Look who we took out. You guys keep up this fight. Well, this is actually going to backfire on German leadership because a lot of German soldiers are going to say, wait a minute, this is their president's son's fighting in this thing. What the hell are your sons doing? German leadership, their sons are at their palace, just gorging on whatever, sausages or something like that. And while their president's sons are fighting in this thing, and a lot of German soldiers already upset about the war, are going to be, criticizing their leadership after this propaganda stunt. As a matter of fact, Quentin Roosevelt, they'll actually create a monument for him, and when Allied troops later march past this area, they find this huge monument honoring Quentin Roosevelt. This actually has a huge depressing effect on Roosevelt. You can imagine if your child was not only killed but then used as propaganda by the enemy. Roosevelt gets incredibly depressed. He's still suffering the effects of malaria from his trip to the Amazon, and in early 1919 he's going to be sleeping one night, and he'll die in his sleep. And supposedly, they say that the Grim Reaper had to come for him while he was sleeping because he was too scared to come for him while he was awake. So anyway, that's going to be the last we'll talk about Roosevelt. Well, the Americans, again, pilots are going to be contributing. They're also going to be Americans contributing as far as the front lines, the trenches. Some 10,000 plus Americans start showing up every day in 1918, at least an average of 10,000 start showing up in 1918. And these American troops are fresh. They have not experienced the horrors of war. So they're getting into lines with British and French soldiers that have seen dozens of buddies die. They understand what's going to happen if you rush across no man's land. Americans don't understand this, so they're going to be saying to the British and French, why aren't you going to get them? Well, again, British and French, because that's dumb. We don't want to do that. Well, Americans, no, you guys are cowards. They're going to start running across. So Americans will call themselves braves. British and French soldiers will call the American soldiers stupid. Whatever the case, the American soldiers are going to start pushing against the German lines. You might hear, Marine Corps, one of their cadences, they call us devil dogs, because Americans just start pushing through, coming after the Germans like devil dogs. Again, a lot of Americans are going to die, but this is going to be incredibly disheartening to the Germans as they start seeing these fresh-faced Americans rushing against them. And this is going to happen throughout 1918. And it's going to culminate in this offensive, or the set of offenses. We're going to talk about this Meuse-Argonne offensive that really begins August 1918, and it's going to end in November 1918. So what happens in August 1918 is the British are going to start pushing this offensive against German lines up here at the Somme, and when the British start pushing back here, Germany's going to do what it's always done with its trenches, is start reinforcing from other areas to the Somme. Well, this is not going to be able to hold this back, because by reinforcing, they're going to leave some of the men from other areas, and this is going to allow these British and French soldiers at this Meuse-Argonne region, some 600,000 Americans and French, to start pushing back against the Germans up here. Because the German soldiers are all back here fighting off the British, the Americans and French are going to start pushing the Germans back. And again, Germans, caught between these two sides, the British are going to start pushing them back up here. So the British are going to start retreating. And again, the Germans are going to start retreating, and the Germans are going to start, saying these Americans are going to keep coming. Basically, the entry of the Americans has tipped the war against Germany, and Germany starts to realize this. And so by November 11th, 1918, Germany, still inside of France and Belgium in areas, only partially even pushed back into Germany. Before they even get pushed back into Germany, German leaderships will say, we've had enough, and they will call for a surrender. And part of the reason they're calling for surrender is because Wilson's talking about this peace without victory thing. So on November 11th, the day that's going to be known as Armistice Day, Germans will call for a ceasefire, and all parties are going to agree to this. Now, it's not a peace treaty yet. You still got to sit down and decide what happens as a result of this war, but you do have an end to fighting. Well, at this point, we now have to figure out what comes next. At this point, by the way, U.S. had something like 112,000 men die. Germany, 2 million. France, a little bit more than 1 million. Austria-Hungary, about 1 million. Britain, a little bit less than 1 million. This is a lot of dead people, and here we are. We got to figure out what happens next. Well, Wilson, it's going to be up to him to install his peace without victory. Well, what Wilson wants to accomplish with this peace treaty, and he'd been thinking about this before the armistice, is he's going to codify this in something he calls his 14 points. What his 14 points are going to be is, we want to make sure there's no secret diplomacy in the future. We saw the dominoes being pushed over after the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, so no longer can you make a secret alliance with so-and-so. You've got to be open with, your agreements with nations. So basically, whenever Austria-Hungary invades Serbia, they got to know that they're also going to war with Russia. And whenever Russia and Austria-Hungary go to war, they got to know they're going to war with Germany. So, we don't have this type of thing happen again. Another one of the 14 points talking about we need to define what neutral nations can and cannot do. He's even going to call for a redrawing of the map of Europe. So Austria-Hungary started to fall apart, again made up of these different ethnic groups. Some of them are declaring independence. Wilson's going to say, all right, Germany, I want to keep Germany together because all ethnicities, similar ethnicities, language, Austria-Hungary's cobbled together. I think we could have avoided this war if you'd basically drawn the lines around ethnic groups, linguistic groups, so you wouldn't have had the fight between the Serbs and Austrian-Hungarians in southern Austria-Hungary. So he's going to want to redraw the map of Europe, basically carve out ethnic groups within Austrian-Hungarian Empire. The big thing that Wilson's going to be pushing for, though, with this peace treaty is he wants everyone to join this League of Nations, a political body where they can discuss issues instead of fighting. So what Wilson will do is he's going to start putting together, and this is actually right before Armistice Day, when it's very clear that Germany and the rest of the Central Powers are going to start surrendering. He's going to start putting together his peace delegation. Well, he's going to make some mistakes putting together this peace delegation. So Wilson decides, actually, I'm going to go to Europe myself to sign peace treaties with the various Central Powers. And so he will sign the peace treaty. He's going to dictate the terms for the United States. But in order to get any peace treaty approved, Wilson will have to take this. He can sign it, but he's got to take it back to the Senate for their approval, and he's got to get 2/3 of the Senate to approve it. Well, this is going to cause a problem for Wilson because right before Armistice Day, he's putting together, realizes he's going to have to sign this peace treaty, needs to negotiate with the Senate, so he wants to make sure the Senate's filled with Democrats. Well, at the congressional elections right before Armistice Day, he's going to start going around talking smack about Republicans in the hopes that doing so will support Democrats. Democrats will win close to 2/3 majority, so he can get any peace treaty signed that he wants to. But instead, Republicans will win 49-47 in Europe, or 49-47 control of the Senate. So he's now going to have to get a majority of Republicans, or he's going to have 47 Democrats, but he now needs to get a significant chunk of Republicans to approve it. And Republicans are upset about him, that he campaigned against them, talked smack about him. He's also going to make a mistake when getting ready to go over to Europe to sign these peace treaties. So Armistice Day is over. Now he's putting together a peace delegation to negotiate the treaties. A lot of people think he should bring Republicans, but he's worried Republicans at this point, parties sort of got this imperialist mindset to it, that Republicans are going to be demanding things of Germany. He doesn't want to do that because he wants peace without victory. So he's just going to put together a peace commission made up exclusively of Democrats. Again, this would be fine if he didn't have to get approval from a Republican-controlled Senate. But as we're going to see, that's not the case, and he's going to face some issues when he gets back. So Wilson, he will take off at the beginning of 1919. Actually, the first time that the sitting president will leave the Western Hemisphere while being president. He's going to take off, arrive in Europe, and Wilson, Britain, France, the Allied powers are then going to sit down with the major Central Powers and sign different peace treaties. So they're basically going to sign one with Austria-Hungary. Again, it's Austria-Hungary kind of complex situation because everything's falling apart here. They're going to sign one with Ottoman Empire, also a complex situation because it's falling apart. And then Britain, France, United States are going to sit down and sign one with Germany. Don't need to know much about the one with Austria-Hungary, except that, again, Austria-Hungary, people had been declaring independence, had been cobbled together from these various ethnic groups. Well, what will happen with the treaties signed with what's left of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire? Is this going to break Austria-Hungary into different countries, different ethnic groups? So down here you're going to have this Yugoslavia, going to be Serbs, is basically the Serbia plus the Serbian-controlled part, or Serbian-populated area of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. This will be created out there. Hungary, full of Hungarians. Austria, actually German-speaking, mostly ethnic Germans. Czechoslovakia, Czechs and Slovaks, people with their own language and linguistic group. Poland, Poles, Romania, Romas, and basically you're going to take these areas, redraw them around ethnic lines with the idea that if you get people of the same language, culture, religion together, you're not going to have the interethnic conflict that you had before. So just know Austria-Hungary going to be broken to pieces, broken up into ethnic lines. It's going to take a lot of time to draw these lines. In all these countries, they're going to be agree to join the League of Nations. So they're going to become independent and join the League of Nations. A different story is going to come out of what was the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire used to make up all this area. Well, started falling apart during the war. What's going to happen with Ottoman Empire is the Britain, France, United States will start drawing lines around this, breaking apart as well. But there's going to be differences than what happened in Austria-Hungary. Maybe because of racism, maybe because of misunderstanding of the situation there. We'll see that the victorious powers will start drawing lines here to create these new nations, but they're not going to be as careful in drawing around ethnic borders as they were in Europe. So what you'll see is Iraq, for example, will be a line will be drawn that includes Sunni, Shias, Kurds, just sort of willy-nilly drawn. Other areas sort of the same thing. Syria, Turkey, and as these areas are being carved out, they're not going to be given immediate independence. Again, those countries that created the Austrian-Hungarian Empire they're going to be given a period where they're going to instead become mandates of Britain and France. So they don't believe that these newly created areas are ready to have independence yet. So for a period of time, Britain will control Iraq. France will control Syria, Lebanon, I believe. Britain will control Palestine, with the idea that for a period of 40 years, 20, 30, 40 years, these countries will rule over these areas, and then after a while they're going to be allowed to become independent. So you can almost look at this as Britain and France sort of creating colonies out of these regions. You could also, say maybe they legit don't think they're ready for independence, but you could also say Britain and France want to create colonies out of what's left of the Ottoman Empire. Again, these aren't going to be allowed to have their own seats at the League of Nations because, again, the British and French will rule them as mandates, almost even colonies of Britain and France for the coming period of time. Germany is going to sit down on one side again, Britain, France, United States, and they're going to sign something called the Treaty of Versailles. And this is going to be named after the place it's signed in a suburb outside of Paris. And when they sit down, basically, Wilson is going to be pushing for Germany not to get punished. We don't want to hurt Germany. Now, there's big reason for this is Wilson thinks that if we punish Germany, it'll lead to resentment, lead to another war like this. I don't want that to happen. The other reason, you can kind of see like some maybe subterfuge here. Germany, provides a good check to Britain and France. So the U.S. will, remain powerful if these guys are, all equal power over here in Europe. I don't believe that's a big motivation for Wilson, but he doesn't want to destroy Germany. He basically thinks that will cause problems in the future. So what he had been promising Germany is, if you surrender, you're going to keep your national integrity. We're going to treat you fair. Well, right after Britain, France, the U.S. sit down, Britain and France are going to look at Wilson and say, not punish Germany, that's ridiculous. These guys have killed 1 million people in France, almost 1 million in Britain. They lost the war. They should pay for the war. So Britain and France are going to essentially overrule Wilson and say, Germany, you need to accept punishment. So in this treaty with Germany, Treaty of Versailles, just the one with Germany, Britain and France will basically talk Wilson down, and they're going to say to Germany, you need to accept blame for this war. This is your fault. Now, maybe you could definitely make the argument Germany should have stepped in, stopped the dominoes from falling, but this war, I would argue, is not really Germany's fault. It was a complex situation. Again, all sides could have done something. Maybe Germany could have done something more. But Britain and France say, no, you have to accept the blame. So that's one thing they're going to force on Germany. You have to accept the blame. And because it's your fault, you need to pay Britain and France $33 billion over the next 2 decades or so as reparations. So you need to pay $33 billion. This is a big deal because Germany now going to have to rebuild, and basically, its infrastructure is all destroyed, at least partially destroyed. But it's not going to be able to take this money and do this, build new schools, do all the things that governments do with tax money. Instead, a good chunk's going to be going to Britain and France. So you have to set blame, you have to pay reparations. Not only that, you lose some of your national territory. So Germany, portion of it will be carved up for Czechoslovakia. Part of it will go to this newly created Poland. Part of it's going to be going to France to create this buffer with Germany. So it gets its national integrity torn up even after Wilson said it wouldn't. Again, Britain and France overrule Wilson. He really doesn't want this to happen, but Britain and France do. And Germany's colonies will be divided up among Britain and France. So Germany, East Africa, I believe, goes to Britain. The Pacific Islands, I don't know who they go to, but Britain and France basically take the spoils of the German colonies. So that happens to Germany. Also, Germany, its navy will have to be, what's left of its navy will have to be surrendered to Britain and France, and Germany will be forbidden, verboten, I think that is German for that. This is one of the few German words I know. It will be forbidden to produce weapons of war. So you can build stuff you need to maintain police force, to the stuff the police need, but things like tanks, planes, battleships, submarines, you can no longer build these things. This is not, we don't want you invading other countries anymore. So you can't build weapons of war. You lose part of your territory, you lose your colonies, you have to accept blame, you have to pay Britain and France reparations. Wilson protests this stuff, but he realizes he's not going to get Britain and France to back down from these things, and so it's kind of weird that he accepts it, but what Wilson is thinking is that this might lead to problems with Germany, but he thinks these problems will be solved because all the parties, Germany, Britain, France, and the United States, will agree to join something called the League of Nations. And again, Wilson had been talking about this international body where people can talk about their problems instead of going to war. So he sees Germany getting its face shoved in the mud, but Wilson's going to say, yeah, this is going to cause problems, but I think that the League of Nations will solve any problems it causes. So all the parties are going to agree to this, and Wilson will agree to it. Germany's going to go to its government, they'll approve the treaty. Britain, France are going to go off to their government and approve the treaty. So they're locked into the treaty's conditions. Now it's going to be up to Wilson to go back to the United States. So he packs his bags June 1919, and that's actually when the Treaty of Versailles is signed, packs his bag, heads back to the U.S., gets here in July 1919, and he goes before this now Republican-controlled Senate. Again, a Republican-controlled Senate that's mad at Wilson for not including them in the Peace Commission. Republican-controlled Senate that is, mad that he was talking smack about him in the 1918 elections. And this Republican-controlled Senate that is, leader of it is going to be this guy, Henry Cabot Lodge. And Wilson's going to have to say to them, approve this Treaty of Versailles. Well, Republicans are going to be, you didn't include us on the Peace Commission. And they're going to start objecting. One of their objections is going to be pretty legitimate. They'll say, why should we join this League of Nations when you didn't include us? And Republicans are going to also be worried, hey, how far does this League of Nations go? Does it have control over U.S. Congress? Is it going to limit U.S. power? Because we don't want to join it if, it takes out our sovereignty. We worry about that. So that's a legitimate Republican concern. But they're also going to basically say, and again, you think about this as Republicans, sort of the imperialist mindset, wanting to spread U.S. markets and influence around the world. They look at the Treaty of Versailles, and they see Britain and France getting reparations. They see Britain and France getting colonies. And they're going to say, well, where's our stuff? We lost men too. Britain and France got colonies. They got money. U.S. should get money from Germany. U.S. should get colonies. And so these Republicans will start objecting to the Treaty of Versailles because it does not provide for the United States. Well, Wilson is going to try to argue, well, I didn't ask for that stuff because I didn't want to punish Germany. Britain and France did. So they're already going too far in taking this. We don't want to add to it. Henry Cabot Lodge and the Republicans will object to this. He's not going to be able to get the 2/3 majority he needs. So what Wilson will start doing at the end of 1919 is basically going to the American people directly. Now we're directly electing senators, which hadn't happened before, until recently. So Wilson's going to decide, I'm going to go to the American people, get them to encourage their senators to sign this, and he starts making train visits around the U.S., saying to people, tell your senators to sign this League of Nations, or to sign this Treaty of Versailles, join the League of Nations. It was our idea, after all. If we don't join, right now, we're the economic leader in the world. Britain falling behind during the war. If we don't join, it's going to delegitimize the body, and everything we fought for, this peace without victory, world safe for democracy, is going to be null and void. I don't think this can survive without us. I don't think it's going to have the effectiveness if we don't join. He goes from one place to another. After a while, Wilson's getting stressed. He starts getting headaches. And towards the end of fall 1919, he's going to suffer a stroke, which paralyzes half of his body. He's going to be out of commission for 6 months. There's not going to be a 25th Amendment that comes later saying that you can, his cabinet can agree to president's unsound and put the vice president in charge. So for 6 months, Wilson's just going to be off the table. His wife will effectively become president because she's going to be relaying messages from him. Some people think she just makes the decisions for him. But for 6 months, he's out of commission, recovers somewhat. But by that time he recovers, people have already forgotten about the Treaty of Versailles. U.S. doesn't sign the Treaty of Versailles, does not join the League of Nations, also doesn't sign the treaties with remained of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. U.S. doesn't sign those. U.S. doesn't join the League of Nations, and so the U.S. doesn't put its stamp of approval, again as the world's leading economic power, on the League of Nations. This is going to have a couple effects. One thing, Wilson, I mean, this kind of messes his legacy up. Part of the reason he got the U.S. in the war was because he thought this would solve future problems. Well, U.S. doesn't join this thing, and as we're going to see, future problems are going to end up coming out of this in spite of the League of Nations. Some people, and this is actually a good thing you say, good significance of the Treaty of Versailles. Some people say that this directly leads to World War II. So right now, when you teach American history, you have to condense things, and you especially condense things that happened, way back when. So when you talk about U.S. history in the 1600s, early 1700s, you can talk about 50 decades in a matter of 30 minutes. It's just a matter of time we condense things in the past. Well, I think in the future, in order to make room for the cyborg revolution of 2027 and the Pepsi Civil War of 2032, you're going to see people combining the world wars, because with this Treaty of Versailles, you're going to see the problems created by it are going to end up leading to resentment, and when World War II comes along, the same issues that were present in World War I are still going to be there, and the League of Nations isn't going to be strong enough to stop it, especially without the United States. So let me put it this way. Treaty of Versailles really did shove Germany's face in the dirt. You got to accept blame for the war, got to pay reparations. Well, think what that does to the German people. You were close to becoming a first-tier nation on Britain and France's level. You fought them to a standstill for 4 years, but you lose, and then you got this national shame of it's your fault. You lost this war. You're to blame for it, Germans. So Germany's citizens have that hanging over their head. You add on top of that this depression that's going to come about. You're paying all your taxes, all this stuff to the British and French, taxes that should be going to schools, hospitals. This is going to destroy the German economy, so they're going to become economically depressed. You add on the fact you lost some 2 million men in the war, and so your Germany is punished, you're economically depressed, things just get awful in the 1920s in Germany. So awful that people are going to be looking to anybody to tell them, you can get out of this, and also it's not your fault. And I'd argue this is going to open the door Just a lot of historians, most historians are going to argue this opens the door for extremist ideologies to become popular in Germany. You'll see this National Socialist or Nazi Party start rising to power in the late 1920s, but start gaining power in the early 1930s, and they're going to gain power by saying, we can get you back to what you once were. You were right there at the first tier. We can get Germany there once more, and you're going to see the once these National Socialists, sort of the extreme group that, if the situation wasn't so extreme in Germany, probably wouldn't have gotten to power, will start tearing up some of the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles, and we'll see World War II come about. And by the way, you add on to all this the fact the U.S. doesn't sign the Treaty of Versailles, and what the U.S. ends up signing with Germany and the other powers is simply just peace treaties they'll approve in 1920, 1921, saying we're not at war. They don't sign the Treaty of Versailles. But what you're going to see is basically the without the United States support, the League of Nations can't do anything to stop the rise of Nazi Germany. So again, I don't know how much of this is Wilson's fault. I think he's got sort of an unfair legacy about him, but certainly doesn't accomplish what he had set out to accomplish. And actually, part of the reason we're gonna is going to be important, because when we do get to World War II, the U.S. see Europe falling into war. U.S. is going to say, what's the point of joining this? We did this last time, and nothing came of it. So anyway, we'll be talking about World War II very soon.